Hi, everybody. It's Larry Kotlikoff back with Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm delighted to have my old friend and former colleague, Andrew Weiss, Dr. Andrew Weiss. He's a economist, very famous economist. Andy, let me just kind of go through his bio quickly, and then we're going to start in on a bunch of interesting questions. But the Andrew's the founder of a prominent asset management company in Boston. He's a professor emeritus at Boston University. He actually was my employee in the sense that I hired him. I was the chairman of the economics department at the time he joined us. And when Andy joined, we skyrocketed from a department that was ranked about 80th at the time to one that was ranked within 12 years, 7th in the country. And it was, I think, largely due to Andy, because Andy knew who to hire much better than I did. And if Andy said to hire X, I hired X. And sure enough, 12 years later, we were ranked above Stanford and Yale and other prestigious places. This is Boston University. And we're still ranked among the top departments in the country and the world. So Andy's a professor emeritus. That doesn't mean he's old. It just means he left BU after a very successful academic career to start his financial management, his asset management company. He's a fellow of the Econometric Society. He was elected to Econometric Society in '89. He ranks in the top 1% of published economists by citations. That's really amazing. We have lots and lots of economists around the world in the tens of thousands. And you're going to be listening to one of the very premier economists in the entire planet. 1% of citations. It's one thing to write papers. It's another for people to actually read them and take them seriously. And that's the case with Andy's work. Prior to founding his company, Andy was a research economist in the Math Center at Bell Labs. Let me just pause there. Bell Labs, everybody who knows about Bell Labs knows that it was one of the creme de la creme research institutions in the country until the breakup of AT&T. And it was named after Alexander Graham Bell. They had a fantastic group of economists and game theorists and mathematicians and scientists. It was located in northern New Jersey, outside of New York. Andy, after being at Bell Labs, he was a professor of economics at Columbia University, and then came to BU. His co-authored paper, Credit Rationing in Markets with Imperfect Information. Credit Rationing in Markets with Imperfect Information. I think we'll get Andy to talk about that one with Joe Stiglitz. Joe got the Nobel Prize in 2001. Is one of the most cited papers in economics. Andy went to Williams College. He received his PhD from Stanford in economics. And he serves on the advisory boards of the University of California Center for Effective Global Action, Last Mile Health, University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda, and the UBS Optimist Foundation. He's a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So welcome, Andy. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here, Larry. Good to see you.
I wanted to start out by having you do what I ask everybody to do, is just tell us how you got to where you are. I mean,
well, I went to high school at Boricua High School, which is the same place that Feynman went. So that's my one claim to fame, was I went to the same high school as Feynman. Carl Icahn also went there, where he talks about what a tough school it was. It really wasn't nearly that tough.
Which high school was this?
Far Rockaway High School. It was far from any place. So people were not going to Stuyvesant or Bronx Science because it was so far from anywhere. So you ended up with like a kind of a suburban high school in a way.
So this wasn't like Exeter or
This was,
Eton. You
Paul
went,
Icahn talks about what a tough place it was and the violence and all. When he went, it was really pretty safe. When I went, it was starting, there weren't guns yet, but
I,
it was a little on the rough side. But you had a lot of smart people, and you had Feynman, like I said. As some people say.
let's just make sure everybody knows who Feynman. Not, we're all, you and I are of one generation, but a lot of people don't know that Feynman was one of the top physicists, got the Nobel Prize in physics, one of the leaders in.
More than a Nobel Prize. So some people talk about him as being the leading physicist of the sort of mid 20th century, last half of the 20th century. That he's modeled. I was talking to the head of Brookhaven Labs, and he describes Feynman as one of the 4 leading physicists of the 20th century.
Right.
So I mean,
yeah. He was at Los Alamos on that project of building the bomb, and if you watch the Oppenheimer movie, I think there's somebody playing the bongo. He was famous for playing the bongo drums. If you're careful and you see you'll catch a picture of a guy playing the bongo, and that's the tribute to Feynman right there. But anyway,
so I started there. Then I went to Williams. Then I went to Stanford, and I went to Stanford because I wanted actually to study development economics. But at that time, in the early 70s, it was a very boring subject. So I quit that and did economics of information or asymmetric information, studied a lot about market failures, wrote these papers, first myself about, unemployment. It always puzzled me, even when I was a little kid. I was a strange kid. I would wonder, why do people work and everybody thinks they're being productive one day and the next day nobody wants to hire them? It always struck me as odd that people were producing things that everybody wanted one day, and the next day nobody wanted to hire them to do anything. So I started writing papers on unemployment, and then the paper with Joe on credit markets was, again, this notion you hear about redlining or credit, that people couldn't get borrowed. Why didn't they just raise the interest rate, make them pay a higher interest rate as opposed to excluding them from the markets? So we did an analysis there as to why you had like a market failure, why the markets weren't clearing. So think about, in economics, you think about the law of supply and demand. It's like supply should equal demand. So I was always curious as to where the markets failed, where supply didn't equal demand. So you'd have unemployment or you'd have credit rationing.
So let me tell the story of the credit rationing, and you tell the story of the and see if correct me if I'm wrong, but then also tell the story about why the labor market doesn't clear, because that's really interesting for people that haven't worked on the economics of information. So as the interest rate starts going up, the population of people that are willing to borrow this is all Joe and Andy's work, the characteristics of the people that are still willing to borrow at higher interest rates changes. So the lenders realize that the people that are trying to borrow are less likely to repay, and then they start raising the rate, and then you can have the people that are able to pay that higher rate. A lot of them, the ones who can't pay that higher rate, may drop out because they think, hey, this is too high. It doesn't make any sense for me to borrow. I'm actually a good risk, and I shouldn't be forced to pay that. And then the lenders realize that the composition has changed yet again. I mean, this is going to happen all instantaneously, but we can think about it as a sequence of events, and then we have even more segmentation of the market. And in the end, you can have very high rates and very little borrowing, or you could have even no.
No, you might, yeah,
no borrowing. The entire market could collapse. That happens in the used car market. There's a famous paper by George Akerlof, who got the Nobel Prize in the economics of information, along with Joe. Joe got it, and let's see, the third laureate was
Spence.
Michael Spence on the economics of it. But tell us, so that's a very interesting story that
Let me modify it a little bit. So what
Yeah.
we're talking about is markets not clearing. So it's not like they think about what Larry said, but the firms think about it in advance and they say, listen, maybe the market would clear at an interest rate of 200%, say. But who's going to borrow at 200%? It's people who are extremely unlikely to repay. They're planning to take the money and go to the casino. So at extremely high interest rates, the people who are willing to borrow are the people you don't want to lend to. So you won't raise the interest rates. In addition, what people do with the money could vary. Even the same people who borrow will do riskier projects because they only repay the project if the project succeeds. So the high interest rate is kind of irrelevant when the project fails and they go bankrupt. So they'll pick riskier projects and you'll get riskier borrowers. So what you might end up with is a world in which they just ration credit as opposed in quantity rationing. They exclude certain types of borrowers or certain sectors instead of raising the interest rate on them.
So they just say we're going to lend a certain amount to each person.
Well, they might exclude certain segments of people, where they just demand higher collateral as opposed to higher interest rates, and then you're excluding the people who don't have collateral. So they'll try and sort of, instead of using the price to clear, they'll try to use other mechanisms, and you could have an excess, people queuing up to try and get loans, but they're just being rationed.
Right. So this is like a way to sort people to where you're lacking information. If you can use some other mechanism that's kind of correlated or some other piece of information that's correlated with the information you don't have, you can use that to sort. Tell us how this carries over to the labor market.
We did it first I did their stuff first on labor markets. Actually, Steve Salop, I should give him credit for this because I was doing stuff on labor markets and he said, why don't you apply the same stuff for credit markets? So it started with labor markets. And again, it was like, if you say demand for labor falls, why do firms fire people? Well, if they cut, rather than cutting the wages, if they cut the wages, who's going to quit? It might be that the people who quit are your best workers. So if you cut wages, you're losing your best workers. Those are the people who can get jobs elsewhere. And they might know more about their productivity than you do. Or other firms might know something about them, your suppliers, your customers. The other thing that could happen is if you cut the wage that you're offering to people, the best people don't apply to you. So if you use the wages to respond to changes in demand, you can get very bad adverse selection. It's very different from the classic model in which you're selling apples. If you're selling apples, you really don't care who buys your apple or whether they're going to make it into a candied apple or applesauce or whatever. You don't really care. They buy your apple. But if
everybody can see it's an apple.
Yeah.
Everybody can tell it's an apple, whereas here.
Maybe I shouldn't use the word apple because of the connotation with Apple computers. Say a pear. You're selling pears. And nobody really, the seller, even if they know, doesn't really care who's buying it or what they're going to do with it.
Right.
So as long as he just cares to sell his pears. But
so I think, and the key insight here, just like the lender doesn't know exactly the credit worthiness of the potential borrower, the employer doesn't know exactly. He's got, he or she has maybe 30 employees. They can't keep track of what everybody's doing every day. And so they don't really know for sure the productivity of any one of these people. And they cut the wage of everybody uniformly. Bingo, the best people who know that they are actually better than the average will be the ones that leave, and the ones who stay, and you'll actually be shooting yourself in the head in this process.
The same thing with the people who are applying. It's just that it's not even that they might not even know more, as long as they know something different from what the employer knows. So they
Right.
know that they're better or worse than what their wage would be.
Right.
So a little bit, they have some information that the employer doesn't know, or that and that maybe they can share with other firms, or they can just go out and work for themselves.
So I think, for people that aren't kind of trained in economics, it's important to kind of point out that this work on the economics of information, Spence and Akerlof and Stiglitz got the Nobel Prize for. And we should also say that Mike Rothschild did a key paper with Stiglitz.
Yeah.
They've been able to give it to 4 people. They probably would have given it to Michael Rothschild as well, but maybe to you too, Andy. But they could go a little bit beyond but this was really a revolution because we had things that people couldn't understand happening in the real world, and it seemed to be completely at odds with supply equals demand with conventional economics. Going back to the 1930s, you had wages fell, but they didn't fall enough to clear the market, or at least maybe there was lots of unemployment, like 25%. But
It's not actually, we don't have great data from the 30s, but it seems as though real wages in purchasing power terms did not fall very much. They might not have fallen at all. They might have actually increased.
because prices fell as well. Yeah.
Fell so much. Prices were falling so much that real wages, it depends on what part of the 30s, but at least during the initial periods, it looks like wages actually were rising, real wages in terms of purchasing. But again, we don't have great data on prices or wages for that period.
Let me ask you, in the 30s, nobody knew about the economics of information and how to think about these problems this way. So we had Keynes. He had a lot of good insights about different issues, but not really this insight about the composition, about the 2 parties not having the employer and the workers and the lender and the borrowers not having the same information set. Wasn't in onto that. And so consequently, you had a lot of policy being made up in the absence of really understanding what to do. So let me ask you this hypothetical, Andy. Suppose you're President Roosevelt in 1933. Would you have, would you have done things differently? Because the Great Depression did not end when he took over. It continued for another 7 years until we got into World War II. And we had a expansion. The Depression consisted of a decline, a recession, an expansion, another recession, another expansion, and then we were back into World War II, where everybody could realize that there was going to be somebody out there to buy your services, namely Uncle Sam he took about 3 million people right off the labor market. So there was lots of jobs available for all these unemployed people. But we had 25%. Today, we have about 3% of the workforce is unemployed. In 1933, when Roosevelt takes office, it's 25%. Output was down about 20%. The stock market was down nominal terms about 86%. Real terms, maybe less. But Andy Weiss is president. He's elected 1932. What do you do in 1933 when you come to office?
No, I think I would have done what Roosevelt did, just more so. Look, the fact is that when they went to war, it went okay. So if you don't have to go to war, you could have just hired these people to do more infrastructure. So we could have done, even much more of like the WPA, so the
which is Work Progress Authority, right? Administration.
Right, yeah, Works Progress Administration.
This is where they directly hire people to do things like we have a cottage up in Vermont, family cottage, right on Lake Elmore. It was a pond before a swamp. And during the 30s, the government brought a whole army of construction people and bulldozers and whatever, and made it into a lake, dug it out,
Done.
take it to the state park.
We did the interstate highway system in the 50s. They could have done that in the 30s. They could have started, could have built the
Right.
interstate highway system. And, the opportunity cost, since these people weren't employed, the opportunity cost, what you're giving up in foregone output is kind of very low because you had all these unemployed resources. So you could have just had huge spending. And if you look, when you had on the deficits, when they ran the big deficits during World War II, you had like a blip up in inflation in 46, but very short-lived, and it dampened down. So I would have just employed a lot of these people, because the firms had these adverse selection, maybe the adverse selection problems that they didn't know who was going to be any good. And also there's another problem there of multiple equilibria that we want to talk about, that they didn't think about those. You can be in a bad equilibrium where nobody's hiring, so nobody's producing, so nobody's buying things, so nobody's producing. It sort of all fits together in a bad way.
Like I don't think you're hiring, and I know your workers are my customers,
Exactly.
and therefore I fire my workers who are your customers, and especially
So
second.
so you're in a bad equilibrium, and you're bad, everything sort of settles down in a bad state. So people also hadn't thought about that. In Keynes, in some ways, you can interpret Keynes as thinking about those ideas that people hadn't thought of before Keynes. So I would have just, like I said, Keynes's book came out in 36. People didn't think that way, but with what we know now, I think we just would have done much more stimulus. If you look at the COVID events, what happened is everybody did massive stimulus packages and came out of it. We came out of COVID. The economy rebounded from COVID a lot more strongly than from the great financial crisis. Maybe we overdid it because of the inflation, but we certainly have a very strong economy.
Yeah,
with
I think the Trump administration handled that quite well. I'm not a fan of Trump, but
with that, I don't think that's
what?
true. No, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think
Well, I mean, I think
no evidence. I think it was they did. If we look, what they did is they were giving money to firms with under 500 employees. There was massive fraud, and as far as we can tell, it might have been about $1 million a job, because we look, there's not much of a discontinuity between firms employing below 500 and above 500. So as far as we can tell, I mean, it was very hard to administer, and it was sort of an honor system. So anybody who said that they were not going to, that they were going to fire workers if they didn't get money, got money. So I think so that was very expensive, and it probably didn't.
And I agree. I think it was poorly done, but relative to doing nothing, I think it was.
Oh yeah, better, I guess. But I mean, a lot of it is the Biden, huge stimulus packages that came under Biden, and the second Trump thing. There was, yeah, I think it was most. I mean, Biden went full blown on, the infrastructure bill and the semiconductor bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, which I think was not much of an inflation reduction, but huge stimulus packages. So
Right.
I think that was why the US rebounded much more strongly than Europe. But Europe also did big stimulus packages. Everybody was doing stimulus packages during the, as a response. So I think
So, Ann,
I'm
just
sorry.
take it back to this question of, in your modeling, it's kind of more microeconomics, but to get your, your problems to happen, something has to happen at the macro level, right? And I mean, is your view that you're not just a microeconomist, you're a macroeconomist, you're an international economist, you're an economist?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
What do you
Yeah.
what was it that you guys were thinking was kicking off the situation where demand was dropping for workers, for example?
I don't know. So it's hard to tell. I mean, it's sort of like people asking me you have these pundits telling you why the stock market fell or rose yesterday, or, and I remember you and I talking in 87, I was saying the stock market's going to crash, but I didn't think it was going to fall like 23% in a day. I mean, nothing really had changed in the world between that one day and the next. It's like everybody, it's sort of like Wile E. Coyote walks off the cliff. Who knows how many steps he's going to take before he crashes? I think this Hyman Minsky talks about booms have the seed of their own destruction. People get over enthusiastic and then they overinvest, and then one day people, and for some reason these mobs, group psychologists coordinate and they all decide, no, this is a bad idea, we better retrench, and then it's just
Because I
random.
think everybody else,
Yeah,
because I think
everybody
everybody
else
else
don't know. They want to get ahead of the curve. They want to retrench before everybody else retrenches, or
right.
they. It's for some reason that I don't understand. There seem to be coordinated psychological moves. I really don't understand why there's so much volatility in the stock market. Which is something I do now. All these people that you hear on TV tell you why the market moved. It's like somebody to ask them if they bought options the day before. If they knew why it was going to do all this, they would have been buying options. And why aren't they worth $1 trillion if they know what the market's going to do a day ahead?
Let me ask you on that. Is kind of a question I have in the back of my brain about the 2008 Great Recession, when we had serial collapses like Bear Stearns and Commonwealth Financial and these different. I think we had 17 major financial companies fail. To what extent do you think hedge funds were actually placing short bets and then going out and advertising the fact that they were pulling out of Bear Stearns?
Had nothing to do with any of that. And also the real estate bubble was kind of a good thing in a way that it burst. So it burst the bubble before it got even bigger. Basically, the banks were doing crazy crap. In other words, I was talking to a guy who is on the executive committee of Credit Suisse, and the head of Credit Suisse was telling them to make what are called payment in kind loans, more of them. You don't pay interest, you don't pay any money, you just pay instead of interest, you just have more debt, or you interest, or you do stock as payment. And there was just crazy irresponsibility on the part of the banks. They were just taking enormous amounts of risk. And it wasn't just the US banks, it was ABN, Amros, the banks, Lloyd's, all the banks.
Why was this happening all at once?
Because they were saying this one of the idiotic statements, while the music's playing, we have to keep dancing. Why? They didn't have to keep dancing, but they would have lost their jobs. Everybody was booking all these profits, and they're getting all these bonuses in the banks by making all these bad loans, very risky loans. They were taking huge amounts of risk with very low collateral. I mean, people were lending to us with offering us huge amounts of leverage. And then all of a sudden, one day, they were calling the loans and wouldn't give us any leverage. So it was just like you have these mob spirits in the stock market, you had it in banking. They were all sort of competing to book high profits and get high bonuses. And then it all fell apart. I mean, this guy was saying that he was sitting next to the risk manager at Credit Suisse and talked to the guy and said, the risk manager, guy who's supposed to be in charge of risk manager, whispers to him, this is going to end very badly. I mean, these payments in kind, it was just really awful.
So could this happen today in the current banking situation?
Not in the banking system, in the shadow banks. What we've done is, in the current situation, and I'd like to get back about the shorting and stuff, because I think the short sellers are the unsung heroes of the economy. They're the good guys. But because they're the ones who tell you that the emperor has no clothes before it's a complete disaster, or that you're heading off the cliff before you actually go off the cliff. So we need to encourage the short sellers. That would be a good thing. But getting back to this, right now they're putting tons of regulations on the banks. So the banks, especially the money center banks, which are being the most heavily regulated, they're basically in the loan origination business. They just originate loans, package them, and sell them on. So then you have what are called shadow banks, who are not regulated by the Federal Reserve. A shadow bank could be a mutual fund or an ETF that owns loans. So they securitize the loans and they sell them on. Or it could be a hedge fund or by a private equity fund or anybody. So the question is, when the loan comes due, are they going to get refinanced? So if the shadow banks freak out, and they're not regulated, who knows how much leverage they have? We don't really know. So they're
the mutual
SEC and the CFTC. Well, yeah, but there's all kinds of family offices, endowments, hedge funds, private equity funds. Talking about trillions and with leverage. Talking about trillions and trillions of dollars. And their regulators don't regulate them for systemic risk, because they just regulate them for fraud. I mean, there's an obsession about fraud, which, sure, fraud's a bad thing, but it's not causing the economy to go to hell. What causes the economy to go to hell, and it's not the short selling, what would cause the economy to go to hell is if the banks that are securitizing these loans can't sell them to anybody. So the people who invested in the mutual funds pull their money out, or the people because they don't have insurance. There's no insurance there. Or the people who are invested in hedge funds or private, any of these vehicles, they pull their money out. Now the banks have nobody to sell the loans to. That's a disaster. So by regulating the banks, we've pushed the risks into an unregulated sector. And that's where the problems are going to rise. It's going to rise in the shadow banks. That's where you can get a crisis.
So you don't see, there was a report after SVB went under that over half the FDIC insured banks were insolvent on a mark-to-market basis. Yeah. You don't see large depositors.
That's true, but how important are they? Let's say there are banks plus credit unions. There are 8,000 of them, about 4,000 odd banks and about 4,000 odd credit unions. It's 8,000. No other country has so many of these entities, but they're very small. If they go under, half the deposits are going in the five major money market banks. And then you have the big regionals. And they're regulated.
You mean money central bank?
Yeah, money banks. I mean, so if you look at, I think it's about maybe 60% of bank deposits are at Bank of America, JP Morgan. I mean, just the name, JP Morgan Chase. And Chase had acquired all these other banks before this, acquired Chemical and, Manufacturers Hanover Trust. I'm old enough to know this. So Chase is like a conglomerate of all these banks. So you have JP Morgan Chase, you have Morgan Stanley, you have Bank of America, Wells Fargo,
Citigroup, Citigroup, right?
Citigroup. You have Citi. So you have Citi, Bank of America, JP Morgan
Wells
Chase,
Fargo.
Wells Fargo, somebody else,
I think Mellon Bank, no?
No, Mellon's not one.
Mellon?
So it would be, let's see, Wells, maybe just those four. JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. Well, yeah, then you have the banks, like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs that don't really take deposits, but they could also have some systemic importance. But I think it's Citi, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo.
Let me ask you, since we're talking about
and they're very highly regulated. And then, like you say, the second tier banks, like, are also becoming very heavily regulated. But I worry that the regulations are making this market riskier, because by regulating them so heavily and not letting them hold risky assets on their books, they're pushing those risky assets, those risky loans, onto the unregulated sector, which could be vulnerable to bank runs. They're not insured. I mean, the people who own shares in mutual funds or ETFs or something that own the loans or making loans and stuff could have runs.
Right. So let me ask you, just given we're talking about collapse in financial sector, in the financial market, about FTX, and compare, if you would, for me, FTX and Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers, I have a friend who lost $1 million. He had it in a brokerage account, about to buy some securities with it. And apparently Lehman Brothers had the ability to take the money that was in his brokerage account, and use it in any way it wanted.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot different from FTX from Sam Bankman-Fried taking money from his depositors and using it to make a loan to Alameda, his girlfriend's company.
His company. His company.
His company too.
No, he owned Alameda. I think
was there some?
I think that
was the difference.
Well,
the difference.
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. So I can't really opine on this. I don't understand. I think the difference was that he was taking the customer's money and lending it to himself, and then giving it to his own company, who then gave it to himself. So he was, by giving these loans to Alameda, and Alameda sort of paying for his political contributions or whatever, transferring money to him. He was, I think, like I say, I'm not a lawyer and I didn't really follow it that closely. It was in other words, if FTX had taken the customer's money and made loans that were not related to him, it would have been very different, and he might not have gotten into trouble, even if they were bad loans. Banks, brokerage firms, by the way, for people who are worried about their brokerage firms and lending out the money, I don't know the details of this, but your friend might have gotten the money back once the dust settled. You should contact your friend again, that they might have gotten the money back, but you can have your cash account. You can have it in a cash. If it's in a margin account, then they can lend you securities out. They can lend you money out. If it's in a cash account, it's a little bit safer. But like I say, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know how the regulations change all the time.
So let me ask you, here you are, you come to BU, you've worked on labor markets and credit markets, and you start, at what point did you start getting interested in financial markets? Because pretty early on in your time at BU, when did you join BU? Was it 87, 88?
I think 86, 87, something like that.
86, okay, yeah.
Something like
so
So
pretty pretty early on, you had started a company,
91,
finance.
I started. So yeah, so the history is sort of, first I've been interested in market failures in my research. So I always was interested in things that didn't make sense in markets. Like, why was Japan at these ridiculous prices at the end of the 80s, or German reunification was supposed to be so great for Germany and didn't make any sense to me for the West German economy. So I sort of was looking at things that didn't make any sense, market failures. And in graduate school, I was actually in the 70s. People might not be aware of this. Stock markets were very, very cheap. And that sort of didn't make sense to me. So, and there were things that just seemed grossly mispriced. So I started dabbling in the stock market. Actually, when I was in college, I started doing it, but made some mistakes and some things that turned out well and some things that turned out badly. But then in the 70s, I started playing around in the stock market. And I did, like, like they say, when things are really cheap, you can look brilliant. So I did very well. Partly that there were just things that were just grossly mispriced in the mid
This
70s.
is individual stocks that you're buying, or is that?
Yeah, there were things like duo funds where they had two classes of shares, one that got the income and one that got the equity. And there were ones where if it went bust, you would quadruple your money on the equity. I mean, you had $16 of equity. The dividends people would get the first $10. You get what was left over. So it was very leveraged, and you could quadruple your money if the market, if the market went down a lot, another, I don't know, third or something, you might lose all your money. But there was a chance you could make these huge returns, and the market didn't go down that much anymore. So there were things that would just made no sense. They were really so mispriced. So I was buying equity shares, these things that you just think that, people are panicking. You can see things that are just grossly mispriced.
So how much of your day, let's say when you're, at BU, before BU, once you start getting interested in this stuff, how much of your day were you spending
Oh,
looking at financial
very little.
opportunities?
More like a hobby. It's sort of like how much of his day did Einstein, I'm not Einstein, but playing the violin, or it was like a hobby. I mean, it was more,
Uh-huh.
I don't watch television. I really don't. It's sort of like, well, I don't really know, because it didn't really interfere with my academic work. It was just sort of a hobby. I
Yeah.
mean,
And you were
that,
always looking for kind of safe arbitrage deals,
no, I wasn't
hedge.
doing arbitrage then. Um, Not then, because you need a company to do arbitrage. That's work. So you need people. I mean, you have to be able to, hedge it. And I was just doing long only. Also, everything was so cheap, so it was fine to just go long only. I
So
didn't
you
start,
first
I'm sorry. Yeah.
when you first started a company, it was investing for you were just investing long as opposed to being a hedge fund.
Yeah. Well, it was called a hedge fund, but we weren't hedging. A lot of hedge funds don't hedge. We
Okay.
do. Now our fund does hedge everything, but originally we didn't. And so we started in like 91, and we doing so we started doing things that were what I described as shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, you have investment trusts, which are like a closed-end fund, which is like, it's like a company that owns shares in another company that were redeemable monthly, or some of them weekly. You'd have like a couple of days of market risk, and if the market was flat, you made 1.5%. So these were like huge annualized returns. People would say, well, it's volatile, you could lose your money. It's only 1.5%, but you do that often enough, you get just enormous returns. So I was doing that a lot, with emerging markets. I was trading in Thailand. There were these redeemable closed-end funds that were very favorable as bets. And
how did you figure out how to do trades in Thailand at age whatever it was from your office to be?
I don't remember how we. So we had this brokerage firm. I don't remember how we ended up trading closed-end funds in Thailand. It's a long time ago.
So it takes, but your company now, I mean, when over the years, since I should disclose I'm an investor with you, small investor, but nonetheless very proud to have been investing with you. Over the years, you've told me stories about, buying a Czech department store that seemed to be inexpensive, and then Albanian mafia or somebody was
Russian mafia.
the
Sometimes you can get very dangerous in these places. This was post, after communism, so there was just a lot of violence in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. This is before the current Ukraine things. It was those places were very dangerous, physically dangerous. So,
but you invested in them anyway.
I was naive. In retrospect, I shouldn't. I mean, we made money, we did well financially, but in retrospect, I didn't realize how dangerous those places it was, how physically dangerous it was to be involved with those people. I mean, we made a lot of money. For instance, there's a guy named Michael Calvi who we knew, and we did really well, but now he's under house arrest in Russia, and who knows what's going to happen to him. He just pissed off the wrong people in these places. I mean, I think Mike Calvi's quite, I think he's an upright kind of guy, but he's in big trouble. And, a lot of these people, have been subjects of all kinds of violence. I think these countries, I was naive.
Okay. Yes. And so Kazakhstan too, right? That was another investment.
Yeah, there's places. Yeah. I mean, there's financial risk and there's physical risk. And then there's even the risk to your family and your children. I mean, dealing with gangsters they're not charming like Tony Soprano. I mean, these guys kill, it's no joke. It's not like you're watching a TV show. You see people dying, getting killed, literally getting killed. Police officials getting killed, police commissioners getting, there's a lot of money at stake. I mean, people will rob a drugstore for a couple $100. I mean, this is millions of dollars. They'll kill people for millions, when this money's at stake. So,
I see.
If I was to do it over again, maybe I would not be involved in those places again.
Okay.
So visit them. If I was going to be involved, I would not visit them physically. I wouldn't. It's just, they're very dangerous.
So you went over there when you could have been arrested or assassinated or mugged or what?
You're kidnapped or who knows.
But you got through without that happening.
Yeah. Well, excuse me.
But that never happened, obviously, because you're here.
Came close.
Came close, really?
Yeah. I think I came close in retrospect. I didn't realize. I thought these people were crooks. I didn't realize they were gangsters.
I see.
I thought they were, that they were in it. They were they were regular crooks who were going to steal the money, sort of like U.S. crooks, really steal the money. I didn't realize that they were, that they killed people.
Well, okay. So, boy, economist learns about the real world. Well, tell me, let's change subjects here for a little bit. And you've been very active in two areas, which is policy analysis, what you would do, let's say if you were in charge of the country, you were president, in terms of reform, where you see the most important reforms, and what they would be like. But also you've been involved through your foundation work in charitable endeavors in Haiti, as I understand it, and also in Africa. Maybe you could talk for the next, we got about 10, 15 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about Andy Weiss as president. Today's president, not 1933's president.
Today. Well, okay. Excuse me. On the philanthropy side, I think what we do mainly now is healthcare in Africa. And my wife and one of my daughters runs our foundation, and the company has its own foundation, which will eventually be getting on the company and will be getting most of the profits in some ways. So I would let me just back up on that. The reason I do this is because I'm selfish, I think, but I want to act my own enlightened self-interest. I want to look back on my life and think I made the world a better place, not that I accumulated a lot of toys. So I'm sort of trying to have a life that I can spend money in ways that I think things can be better. If I was president, I would be pushing for careful measurement to make sure the Defense Department got audited, for example, to pass an audit. So it wasn't just ridiculous stuff. And I'd put a lot of money into improving healthcare, TB vaccines, nutrition. We're doing a big nutrition program in conjunction with USAID. The children were stunted. That's horrible. So trying to get deworming, which has reached about 70% of the population, we get it to 100%. So you have deworming programs. There's a lot that we know how to do. We just have to do it. And so I put a big emphasis on improving healthcare in sub-Saharan poor countries. Then, I'm sorry.
Well, and in contributing to, donating to Africa, to these causes, how do you ensure that it's marginal, that it's actually making a difference at the margin?
That's what we're dedicated to, is we price it out. We do it exactly the same way my firm does it. Except instead of the output being risk-adjusted returns, the output is alleviation of suffering. So for instance, we gave $1.2 million for a pilot program, a company's foundation, on clean water. GiveWell, we designed the program. Oh, shit, I'm sorry. GiveWell, so we designed the program about intervention. GiveWell saw, which is a big philanthropy. They saw what we were doing and the way we designed the program. They came up with $38 million to add to it on clean water. We think that this program the Indian government, we've been working with the Indian government, the local government, we think it's going to reach about 250 million people, save tens of thousands of lives.
Well, tell us a bit about the project. What is it that is special about it?
So the Indian government was going to had a project of putting piped water to people's homes. Okay. The question is, but they weren't going to chlorinate the water. So the pilot is to figure out what's the best way to chlorinate the water, whether it should be at a village level or at a district level, and how to sort of stimulate the government to put in chlorination at the same time as they're putting in this piped water. Because people like piped water, they don't have to go to the wells and stuff. but chlorinated water is very cheap chlorinating it. So, but, so we had we put a lot of effort into formulating a intervention that was really successful. I'll give you another example of intervention I'm really excited about that's very cost effective. Is a woman called Ann Carring. We also sponsor research, so we sponsored her research project. So what she did is she gave bracelets to mothers when they had their kids vaccinated, so they get a different color. What you'd get is a lot of kids would get vaccinated in the hospital, but then they'd come home and they wouldn't get the third, the fourth, the fifth round. So they got a colored bracelet every time they got a round. I mean, these colored bracelets would cost like, I don't know, 10 cents or something. I don't know. Very
Right.
just a bracelet that they could show their neighbors. They got huge increases in vaccination rates. So we're bringing that to scale just by giving them these colored bracelets that they could show. And if they didn't have one, they had a kid, the people in the village would look askance at them. You didn't get your kid vaccinated. So,
Right. Very clever.
yeah. So
It's
you
like,
can, these are very cost effective. This costs almost nothing. And you get huge results.
it's interesting. It's an information problem because you can pre-ride on not having your kid vaccinated, but when it becomes clear that you don't have the bracelet that everybody else has, now the information is out there. So it kind of connects back to your earlier work.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the US. You've been pushing hard on consumption taxation.
So if you look at the US, on income redistribution, first of all, we don't have any notion. I mean, when Zuckman got this, we don't know what the income distribution was in the past, but I think it's actually much worse than people say today on the top end. It's better at the bottom end. I mean, the bottom people are not nearly as poor as you would think. If you look at their consumption levels, a lot of that could just be people in graduate school. I was in the poverty level, supposing when I was in graduate school, but I had a great standard of living. It's kind of weird at the bottom. They're consuming consistently more than they claim as income. But if you look at the top, because we don't tax, most of that income is capital gains, and you can use the capital gains to live off of. I mean, if you look at Manafort, he was living off borrowed money. So that's why, he got convicted of this, but he never got caught if it wasn't that he was caught up in all the Trump stuff. But you can live on borrowed money, have a very high standard of living, and not report any income tax.
So let me just make it clear to everybody. If you're super rich and you have a pot of stocks, let's say that's appreciated, so you have capital gains, you can go to the bank, and Andy told me this, explained this to me. Just go to the bank and you borrow against those stocks. You put the stocks up as collateral, and you can, if you're super rich and there's no risk really to the bank of lending to you, so that you get to these
even if you're not super rich, you can go to a brokerage firm. I mean, Fidelity will lend to me at about less than 0.5% over the risk-free rate on stocks. So even if they'll lend, there's all kinds of brokerage firms that will lend to you, so you can borrow against this stuff. You might have to pay tax. The interest might not be tax deductible, but you can. Given that they're cutting the IRS stuff, you could probably, who knows, you might even be able to take the interest expenses as a tax deduction, but you could live off of it, and in other words, you can have a very high level of consumption and pay very little tax.
Just to be clear, so I'm super rich, I've got all these stocks, but if I sell them, I'm going to have to pay taxes on the capital gains. What I want to do is leave them to my kids with this, what's called a step up in basis. So
that's even worse.
Kids don't have to pay any capital gains tax on what they inherit.
Right.
So that goes capital gains, that income. Capital gains is a form of income because the company earns income and then just reinvests it, and it makes the value of the stocks go up. Anyway, so what I do to have my yachts and trips around the world and fancy vacations and expensive jewelry and clothing and so forth is I just borrow
That's
again. And if I have billions of dollars, there's only so much you can consume, so many trips. And then this is how people go through. When I had breakfast with a ski and a child of one of the biggest hotel chains, and the kid was like 32 or something, and we were just discussing tax reform, and I said to him, I started to explain, talking to him about the wealthy, and this is before I really talked to you about this, no, it's after I talked to you, and I said something about the taxation of the wealthy, and he started to laugh, and he's a nice kid. He wasn't a jerk or arrogant or anything like that. He just started to kind of smile, and I said, "Why are you smiling?" He said, "You don't understand something." I said, "What don't I understand?" I said, "Let me guess. You guys don't pay any taxes." He said, "Exactly. We just borrow. We do the Andy Weiss description of what they do, which is we just borrow against our appreciated assets and never pay taxes at all, basically." So
yeah.
this is what we have in our country. We have the
Yeah.
rich, the super rich, paying nothing, basically. And that's very important. Any president comes in office should be talking about that and
Right.
get that fixed.
Right, but we also, since they're not selling the assets, and since these studies look at tax returns to see what the distribution of income is, at best, that doesn't show up on your tax return. If you haven't sold the asset, it doesn't. In other words, if the stock pays you a dividend and you use it to buy stock with the dividend, that's sort of equivalent to them not paying a dividend and the price of the stock goes up. But in one case, it'll show up on your tax return. In the other case, it doesn't. It shows up as income. In the other case, where they just don't pay a dividend and the value of the stock goes up anyway, you don't show up as income. So it doesn't show up, this kid you talked about, on his tax return, he won't be showing any income.
So the surveys, including, the data that we have, including data from the IRS, from the Treasury, about the distribution of income and wealth, is missing, potentially, Andy's saying, a good chunk of the upper tail, so that things may be much more unequal than we understand. We've got like 3 more minutes. Let's talk about consumption taxation.
The way you would do it is you look at
so you would try and deal with this problem with let's just be clear.
Right.
Let's make the connection. You would like to deal with this problem of the super rich not paying taxes.
Not the super rich, anybody who should be fair, just the rich, anybody, that we should have a fair tax system, not just everybody. And the idea is we should tax people when you consume, you're taking resources away from the rest of the economy, from the rest of us. So we should tax consumption. Now, the normal thing people talk about taxing consumption is like a VAT tax or something like that. That has all kinds of problems, and to make it progressive. So I'm doing it a different way, which is that you take all the possible income that people could use, all the revenues, cash flows that people could use for consumption, which includes all their borrowing, whatever they could possibly use for consumption. Then
all the cash in.
Cash in. So all the borrowing that this kid was doing, that's what he could possibly use as consumption. Then you subtract savings. And you could subtract some other things if you want, like medical expenses, if you want, or charitable giving. What's left is consumption. And you can have a very high tax rate on that. On those taxes, on that consumption, and very progressive. It can be very progressive. You can exempt, say, the first, if all the consumption below the median level for the economy, and or whatever level you want, but you can make it very progressive. It's sort of like what I say about the story about Michelangelo and the statue, the David statue. This might be apocryphal. Is that he said he took a block of marble and he chipped away everything that wasn't David. and what he's left with was David. So you have this income that comes in, you chip away everything that's not consumption, but you're left with this consumption, and you can tax that at a very progressive rate. We could start at least using it as an alternative minimum. So if your tax on consumption is higher than what you're paying in income tax, you get hit with the consumption tax. And that would target very wealthy.
So when I ran, not everybody knows this, but I ran as a write-in candidate for president in 2016. And I had a platform. A lot of it was influenced by talking with Andy. And you can read the platform. It's a book called You're Hired. It's a free download at kotlikoff.net. But I proposed this progressive consumption tax, a cash flow consumption tax, I think, and the limit was above $100,000 and it was at a progressive rates above that. So this is really quite easy to implement, I think, and Andy thinks. We have the data to do it, and we should do it. We should also impute rent on people's homes and yachts so that we get the income equivalent of holding these expensive assets that they're just sitting on, so that we tax full, that the inflow includes, if I'm sitting on a yacht, I'm in effect getting the rent from that yacht. That's part of my income. So that needs to be included to really do this right, but it can be done.
But also by doing that, by the way, I'm sorry, Larry, it would also free up a lot of capital. I mean, you have somebody like Ken Griffin who owns all these houses all over the place. If that taxes a consumption, he might not own so many, and those would be available to the rest of the population.
Right.
Absolutely. So you'd have stuff available to everybody.
Yeah. So I think let's wrap it up. But I think what you've everybody's heard and seen is that Andy Weiss is one of the most brilliant economists and level-headed and philanthropic and successful people on the planet, and also a lovely person, a great friend of mine, a longtime friend, and we're going to get you back.
Larry. Larry's done incredible work on giving, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, bringing attention to the problems of Social Security. And it's only now that, even now, we're not giving it nearly enough attention, but he was really way ahead of his time in getting people to focus, trying to get people to focus on the enormous problems the Social Security system is facing. And if people had listened to Larry 20, 30 years ago, we'd be in a lot better shape than we are today.
Thanks, Andy. So listen, everybody, come back again to Economics Matters, the podcast. Andy, thanks a million for joining us. And
thanks for inviting me, Larry.